So, good morning again, everybody. Buongiorno a tutti. We will hold the workshop in mostly English, I think, because we have a very international audience here. I hope this is okay for everybody. Of course, Italian, who speaks Italian, please communicate in the local language, of course, but I will keep it with English for now. We have almost everybody here. Some colleagues are online. I would also like to welcome there. Some people are still on the way, as far as we know, but I think it's time to start. If there's something they miss, probably you can inform colleagues of yours coming a bit later how we will proceed. So, dear commissioners, dear colleagues, dear Venetian partners, cari partner veneziani, dear friends, cari amici. I would like to cordially welcome you to this two-day workshop here at Palazzo Trevisan. We called it Towards the Green Lion. This is clearly a working title, just an idea. I will say a few words on that, but it already says what it is about. We, or many of us, are Biennale people from different countries, from different pavilions, organizing the exhibitions here. And we felt the need that we need to change things, that it's rather urgent. We come together in a group that also doesn't have really a defined name. Some call it the Global Commissioners Group. Some call it the Open Commissioners Group. Well, at least it's clear the commissioners of the pavilion. This means the official responsible for the exhibitions in the national pavilions are the ones who took the initiative. And just in brief, how this came together, since quite a few years we have kind of two groups even, one which is more related to the Architecture Biennale and the other one which is more related to the Art Biennale. This group started very small, I think some of them with a coffee breakfast in Venice during the opening week, where people said, oh, we should team up better than we do. Because so far our feeling is or was that the national pavilions, they work very much on their own. They don't really know what the colleagues are doing. There's not enough contact between us. This is one information. And it was actually something rather negative that brought us much closer together. It was the COVID crisis. Because we did not know, will the Biennale happen? How will it be communicated? Will it be postponed, which then happened partly, and that's where we really started communicating on a very regular base. Of course, Zoom. We did not come every time to Venice, and this made us kind of stronger and made us also to a certain extent a partner to communicate with La Biennale, the organization. We were in direct touch also with the president, discussing things, writing letters, what we wish that could be organized for our needs. And one of the first results we really had is that that year when we couldn't really open the Biennale as usual because of COVID, later in autumn it was possible, so we organized for the first time the Pavilion Days, which was a rather informal come-together, but many of the pavilions used this opportunity to invite their politicians, their scene from their countries, their professionals to Venice in autumn instead of spring. So this was a common effort which also resulted in a website which we built, for instance, so a shared platform which was something I would say quite new, that the pavilions independently of La Biennale organized themselves, even including a website. And then, of course, last spring, I think the voices got louder and louder that we have to also talk about another big issue, to not call it a problem, I think it's just a challenge, the ecology. We organize exhibitions with many materials, we bring lots of stuff to Venice, we bring lots of people to Venice. We probably do not interact at the best possible level with local initiatives, forces, people here who know a lot about ecology in Venice. And I think where else than in Venice is this theme so interesting, so challenging. This city, probably, see whether this works. Oops, goes very quick. It has to go a bit back. Yes. This city which, yeah, some of us love and know very well, others are still a bit foreign here because they only come to do their business, they have to leave very soon, but a city that is very impressive and where ecology plays a very special role. You know all the problems, we will not talk about this now, the rising waters in the world, the over-tourism which we have in Venice, people leaving the city, all these questions. And then we have this huge event of the Biennale, which comes every year to Venice in several forms. We do not only have the Art and Architecture Biennale, we have the film festival, theater, dance, music, all these events which make part of the Biennale. And for us, I think it's really important to discuss now in these 2 days. This is the idea, what we can improve regarding sustainability of our exhibitions in Venice. Just to give you a bit the context, my name is Sandi Paucic. I'm the Commissioner for Switzerland, and it's a big honor for us that we, our team here, the Biennale team of Pro Helvetia, the Swiss Arts Council, can host you here in Palazzo Trevisan. The Palazzo Trevisan is on one side the seat of the Swiss consulate, but since many years we organize here, because we have this beautiful salon, cultural events, discussions, concerts, readings, film viewings, all kinds of cultural events which I think are not only addressed to the international Biennale audience or any other international audience, but are appreciated also, I think, by the local culture audience here in Venice. The place is usually very well attended and it interacts really with Venice, which we are very proud of. So this was the reason that we proposed to hold the workshop here. A workshop which grew and grew and grew. We have on the list at least about 70 people, which is a lot for our infrastructure, so I hope we're going to manage. Initially, we were, until recently, until let's say almost a few days ago, we had like the idea of 40 people, 45 people, and said it's easy, we'll do it. Now it's 70. So we hope we can infrastructurally manage that. You will see how it's going to work. I will also very briefly explain it. We have some breakout rooms where we can go to work later, and please, for your understanding that everything's now a bit small for the many of us, but I think we should manage. Well, and interesting wise, and this is probably a typical thing, yeah, for us commissioners, I don't know, I'm speaking for myself, we planned this event, and of course we did not look at the Venetian calendar. It's the weekend and today the Monday of the Festa della Madonna della Salute, one of the big Venetian events, probably, don't know whether it's the biggest or the second biggest, I would have to ask. Oh, so somehow I struggle a bit. Yes. I don't know whether Redentore is bigger or Salute is bigger, probably both are.
We're not here to think about what's bigger than
Very good, that's a good statement from Jane. Yes, exactly. No, but I mean the more interesting thing that in both events I mentioned also the Redentore and also the Salute festivities, the Venetians build a bridge over the waters, and I think that's the good statement. I think we should build bridges the next 2 days between us, but also between Venice and us, and of course for the Biennale we should build bridges. So this is a bit the metaphor I would like to use for this. Building bridges means building a network as well. I should have the next slide. Yes, yes. Okay. Yes, I mean, to explain the Festa della Salute, it is actually, it remembers a plague from the 1630s. The Venetians, when they hoped that the plague, which was a big problem not only in the Middle Ages but in the early modern times, that the plague would go, that they could finish it somehow, they would promise to build a church. And one of the churches that was built when the plague then in 1631 was stopped was the Salute Church, and that's where the celebrations take part these days. Well, and as we call the workshop the Green Lion, I was very unsecure which lion I should use as a slide. Should I use this lion, which is probably not copyrighted anymore because of age? Or should we use this lion, which is very much copyrighted? So I didn't dare to paint this lion green. Usually it's red when it's in printed materials. Sorry, I'm running around. So I took this lion, which is a tourist souvenir from Venice. It's a working title, as I said, and probably we do not have yet a shape for what we're doing here. We do not have the form for it. So I thought maybe, in a way, it's problematic, this lion, because probably it stands for over-tourism in Venice. You can buy this at every corner, but at the same time, I think that's where we are somehow. We're globalized, we have the tourism, and I mean, Venice with Saint Mark's evangelist was in the Middle Ages was one of the main pilgrimage places in the world, and today it's still a pilgrimage place for tourism, but it's still a pilgrimage place for the Biennale. We have so many people coming here. We're counting our visitors at the Swiss Pavilion, and we're expecting to get really to 500,000 visitors in the Swiss Pavilion, which means that probably there's even more in the whole Biennale. So we are contributing, of course, to the people coming to Venice. Probably some very small organizational points. I already said it's a bit small, the spaces. I hope they're going to work out for everybody. We continue the next slide. Just to give you an idea, of course, it's a bit abstract, but we're in the big Salone, and towards the water side, towards the Giudecca Island, we have 3 seminary rooms which we can use. We've put up a minimal signalétic system, so you should be able to find your rooms. You see we also have 2 toilet facilities which can be used near the seminary rooms. And for the rest, there's some little things to say. We have a beautiful balcony, and please go out and look at it, but please not all together. The balcony is not built for too many people, so keep it reasonably light, the balcony. And I would ask the smokers, if there are any, to go downstairs and not smoke on the balcony, if that's possible, during the 2-day workshop. And we will make some structured breaks in between the working groups, working group blocks. There's going to be coffee. We will today serve a very simple lunch sandwich. You will get enough food, of course, but it's not a formal dinner, so it's a bit quick working lunch, so to say. While tomorrow, for those who are going to be tomorrow as well, we will just let it open so you can make a break and go out, take a bit of air. And the other thing is that, we have to see how our internet works, because we are also many. We've put up a password, but now we've taken it already away because we're a bit worried that the Zoom connections may fail if everybody uses the same web. So those who have a free internet, please don't use our local internet if it's possible. But of course, those who need to do something, they are free to use it. Okay, so at the end, before we go to the first keynote, I would just like to thank everybody who was involved in the planning of this workshop, especially my colleagues from Pro Helvetia, our local helpers. Thank you very much for being so flexible to joining us this day. And of course, the colleagues from the pavilions who have also worked hard to prepare and to think about what's going to happen today. The Netherlands, Francian, thank you very much, Germany, Austria, and Finland especially. And then, of course, all the locals. I would like to thank Jane Damosto. Thanks for supporting us in thinking and preparing. And Giulio Grillo also, and his team, who supported us a lot. So we will get to know these people closer, but thank you everybody who helped, especially also the technicians who are here with us, Manuel and Alessandro, who are trying to make everything work, I hope also for the online people. Well, with this, I would like to change to present the first speaker, which is Jane Damosto. Jane's focus on direct action comes from her training as an environmental scientist at Oxford University and the Imperial College in London. She has an international experience as a consultant on sustainable development. Research investigations have covered climate change and wetland ecology plus methodology issues like indicators and valuation approaches and the integration of different branches of knowledge and or levels of uncertainty to overcome complexity and characterize urgent issues. After working in London in management consultancy and venture capital, Jane joined the environmental economics group at the Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei in Milano. Since moving to Venice in 1995, she has worked continuously and variously. European projects for local NGOs, Agenda 21 for Venice municipality, a review of climate change research in Italy for the International Biosphere Program. Consiglio Nazionale di Ricerca, the Venice in Peril Fund, Cambridge University, 5-year study flooding and environmental challenges for Venice and the lagoon. Hosted by Corilla and the Venice Report on Demography, Change in Use of Buildings, Public Finances and Tourism. And there's much more I could list here. She gives lectures frequently, appears in the media, and is invited to participate at conferences and seminars worldwide. So Jane, what is your subject? I give you the stage. Please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy, for changing the word sustainable to suitable, which I think is, 20 or 30 years ago, sustainable seemed like an option, but it really isn't anymore. So after that introduction, I'll just go straight in. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We Are Here Venice is an activist platform, which is the bit that was coming at the end of Sandy's presentation. After all that work in 2015, together with Liza Fior, who's here today, We Are Here Venice was established. And what I'll be talking about now is the work we do and how it relates to the suitability of the Biennale. We're an activist platform and we advocate specifically for Venice as a living city. We're multidisciplinary. Oh, my presentation. Okay, there we are. So Young Han in the top left is also here today. We're multidisciplinary. We endeavor to provide reliable, clear information for meaningful debates and direct actions that are part of finding long-term solutions which work for Venice. And we always relate what we do to the rest of the world. There's useful knowledge, of course, to be integrated from international networks for Venice, and also Venice itself is a key microcosm that has so much attention that ideas and solutions can be broadcast back out to the rest of the planet. Our work is divided into 3 areas of action. Venice is the lagoon, languages of value, and exchange of knowledge. I'm going to talk now specifically about the action area, Venice is the lagoon. The city of Venice exists within this delicate lagoon ecosystem the fate of the city depends on the health of the lagoon and vice versa. There is no reference state for the lagoon. It's not like a patch of savanna or jungle where one strives to preserve its pristine state. For nearly 2 millennia, Venetians have been managing these exchanges and processes that determine the characteristics of the lagoon itself and the associated functions for nature and society, including the fabric of the city. Some of you that have been working in Venice for a long time know this stuff, but there might be some of you who don't. 500 years ago, the main rivers that were feeding into the lagoon were rerouted away from the lagoon directly into the Adriatic Sea to stop the lagoon from silting up. So this is just to give you an example of like some very big changes that have been made in Venice for Venice over time. Another significant change is the areas of marshland, which are locally known as Barena, that have been reclaimed to make islands bigger for huge areas of Venice like Sant'Elena, just beyond the Giardini, which was a social housing project mainly, or in the 1960s, they built on top of large areas of Barena to expand the industrial area of Marghera. And that, in turn, led to the excavation of the major navigation channel across the lagoon for petrochemical tankers, commercial shipping, and now, infamously, for the continuation of the cruise industry and the damage that it's causing to Venice. What I'm trying to say is that the lagoon has been subject to major human intervention since the earliest settlements. It's not followed the natural course of coastal systems that either silt up to become extensions of the mainland or gradually become eroded and are united with the rest of the sea as marine bays. The boundary in Venice between natural and man-made is very blurred, and that's why one has to conscientiously and consciously think about everything we do. Venice is Venice, and part of its uniqueness comes precisely from the way it expresses this coexistence of human activities, physical forces like the tides, and natural processes. The salt marsh in the lagoon that is covered by this very specific range of different species, that is responsible for anchoring the sediments that are vital to the health of this lagoon and the city itself. It slows down the velocity of the currents, as well as absorbing and storing more carbon dioxide than forests. We find ourselves having to, those flags all over the palaces along the Grand Canal say Venezia e Laguna. We find ourselves having to reaffirm this intimate relationship between the health of the city and the protection of the lagoon all the time. And this demonstration we organized about a few years ago, but we keep having to remind people about that, although there has been quite a significant improvement in people's recognition of the importance of the lagoon recently. The lagoon has sustained and been sustained by centuries of human inhabitation and incremental alterations. But now the question of scale is critical. The accumulation of pollution, unmanaged water traffic, as well as the growth of shipping with the associated large-scale erosion and loss of sediments are threatening the fragile ecosystem. The amount of salt marsh in the lagoon is just 1/6 of the amount that there used to be before the river diversion 500 years ago. And in fact, in the past 50 years or so, since the excavation of the navigation channel across the lagoon to reach Marghera, the amount of salt marsh loss has risen exponentially. But it's not just the loss of salt marsh that's critical. Venice has also lost an enormous number of residents. The loss of Saltmarsh kind of parallels the loss of residents. There's now just 80,000, less than 80,000 people living in the lagoon, which is Venice, the Lido, and the other islands. Whereas on the mainland of Venice, there's about 3 or 4 times that number of residents. And the effect of global economy is reducing Venice to little more than what we call a tourism monoculture, and simultaneously sustained and destroyed by tourism. It's a grotesque image that comes from Salvatore Setti's book, If Venice Dies. So, oh, wait, go a bit. Not only are the people living in the lagoon, have they become a small minority compared to the residents in the rest of the municipality in Mestre and Marghera, but we're administered as a single block, which creates a lot of problems. Also, you have to realize that the number of beds in the city that are slept in by residents are now fewer than the number of beds available for short-term holiday lets, hotels, B&Bs, etc. And for Venice to remain a living city, a new language of value is needed that sees the significance not only of the stones of Venice, but the unique amphibious culture which built and maintains them. This singular, precious and fragile city is the paradigm. None of the issues facing Venice are unique, but the complexity of the historic city and its symbiotic and existential relationship with the lagoon, together with the pressures coming from the mainland, makes the combination of factors and their effects all the more apparent. That's Vivienne Westwood, and she was our first major supporter, and she encapsulated this very well by saying that Venice is a mirror on the world. Resolving and reconciling the threats to Venice is like working at the laboratory scale. The experience and insights, as well as the specific knowledge gained, will help other places sort out their sustainability issues too. They must do that. But on the other hand, if Venice is allowed to disappear, that would represent the beginning of the end of humanity if we're not there already. We feel this very intensely. Any kind of calamity, and we find ourselves always, oh, my slides got mixed up. Any kind of calamity, we're like all over the global media, and we feel this as a kind of morbid obsession with what's happening to Venice. It's like people are watching us to see what's going to happen to them. It's an enormous privilege to be living here, but it comes with a responsibility too. And as the pressures of climate change become so evident, Venice is right at the forefront. Don't forget that tomorrow there's very high flooding forecast here in Venice, and they should action the mobile barriers, but I dare say we never know whether they will or not, so keep your ear open or look on your phones to get the updates. Venice's persistence over the centuries has not been easily won. It's the result of a very strong culture of innovation and the constant conscious management of the interrelationships between physical, human, and natural factors within the lagoon system. A lot more needs to be done to maximize the resilience of Venice. A strategic planning approach is necessary in order to secure the future of this city. The Biennale certainly draws the world's gaze to Venice, but how does this serve the interests of the city and its residents? As a global cultural event, it's inevitably a significant mechanism within the metabolism of contemporary Venice. It's really encouraging to be here with all of you. and we can definitely work on this all together. In fact, I'm boldly assuming that that's why you're all here. It's impossible not to notice the connections between Venice and the Biennale and the activities which link the institution to the city at the local level and the ways in which these connect to Venice and the rest of the world. Exhibitors clearly benefit from the extraordinary backdrop, and some Biennale workers, many of you included, as well as the visitors, never tire of the pleasures of spending time in Venice. But there are serious threats to both its historic urban fabric and its future as a living city. The question is not whether Venice should host the Biennale, obviously. It's a significant reality. But should Venice be getting more from the Biennale and vice versa? These themes are expanded in the booklet that I think you are all given a link to, and if you haven't read it already, you can download it from our website. But the magnitude of the Biennale and its growth in recent years is linked also to the global mass tourism that is so difficult for Venice to absorb. But without Venice, what would the Biennale be? We want to address this, what I called, I don't know if I've had enough time to think about it, but I call it reciprocal contingency. Simply put, the Biennale activities filter through into filter through into helping Venice rebuild the fabric of everyday life. And Venice, in turn, can thereby become a better place for creating and showing art and architecture from the world and to the world and for the world. The second action area of We Are Here Venice, alongside Venice's The Lagoon, is called Languages of Value. It's where we endeavor to clarify in terms more or less the specific what changes are happening to the city and how. For more than 10 years, I've personally, or We Are Here Venice itself, has been involved in such a multiplicity of roles. It filled 3 slides that I'm going to spare you. Well, here they are. As I said, the publication, How Is It For You, which had a lot of input from Liza Fior, who I'd mentioned already, and the determination of Carolyn Smith, who's currently working on her PhD at Cambridge and isn't here now. She really helped us a lot to unpick some of the synergies and conflicts that surround the Biennale, its dominant position in the Venetian economy, and its resonance in global markets. We're here to promote a more holistic approach to Biennale activities. The aim is to stimulate everyone to think more carefully about the distribution of human capital, economic flows, the effects of the different spatial uses within the city. It was suggested that we include some uninvited propositions for future curators and exhibitors, and they're all there in the booklet. But most of our analysis related to the 2018 Architecture Biennale. But since we're continuously researching, observing, collecting data, interviews and media reports, the questions we set ourselves in 2018 when we were writing the report are very relevant still today. What is the role of the Biennale with respect to the future of Venice? Or for how much longer will Venice be in existence and thus a host for the Biennale? Can the Biennale be doing more than raising awareness of the issues facing the contemporary city? Should an institution and event as far-reaching and influential as the Biennale be more ambitious, more responsible, more accountable to the message emanating for the platform? Can we be showcasing issues without doing anything about them? Can the institution itself and or those who participate in the events have a more direct impact? What can we do to help? it is obvious that the Venetians are being strained. The Biennale is the key channel within the contemporary city for the restoration, for restoration, as the Arsenale so clearly illustrates. And indeed, the Biennale has just received 160 million euros of COVID recovery ecological transition budget that they're going to be spending in the Arsenale. But the question remains, what happens once these exceptional sites have been restored? What are the other potential complementary uses of the spaces outside the exhibition period, or even in parallel with the exhibition? I have this data here that I surprised myself when I reread it this weekend. In 2017, 23 collateral events took place and 33 nations were represented in dispersed locations, in addition to the 12.8 hectares of the two main Biennale sites. The Biennale Bacheca lists an additional 49 hectares of spaces that are available for rent for exhibitions and collateral events. The entire Sestiere of San Marco is smaller, that's 45 hectares. Can Biennale events realistically seek to engage the local population, considering their ticketing and access protocols? Is the Biennale's impact limited to each 6-month exhibition period, or can the years build on each other and have a more lasting legacy? Are there ways? So I'm nearly finished. The Biennale's policy of expansion has definitely been highly successful, but has it now reached such a big size that the quality of the visitor's experience is compromised? It's diluting each of the national pavilions. It's almost impossible to try and fully appreciate the entire exhibition. What will the future development policy of the Biennale be? And on behalf of Venice and the Venetians, I'd like to say, put the thought in your mind, who is the Biennale really for, and who benefits from it? How can such a large temporary event become more sustainable in the context of the local economy and its social dynamics? These are huge questions that we've got the best part of 2 days to think about. And talking to Liza, she reminded me that, big change has to come with small moves. And we started working together back in 2010 when Liza's practice, MUF, was representing Great Britain. And the things that we were doing then resonate very strongly now. And so I'm just going to show a little film from that pavilion. And the thing that you should all realize is that Liza and her team brought nothing from the UK for the entire exhibition, except for Ruskin's notebooks. Were you going to add something?
The only thing I was going to add was we called the pavilion Villa Frankenstein, which was because John Ruskin made his lessons, the Seven Stones, from Venice. And when he looked at South London, all the little brick houses that had been impacted, he described them as Frankenstein's monsters of his own making. And so we called it Villa Frankenstein with that question of what lessons can one take from one place to the other, as an open question of thinking about a sort of over-inflated scale of master planning rather than working from the detail and specifics of a place. Anyway, great pleasure to be here. Yeah, I've literally looked at this. Right, so that's fine.
The British Council's been commissioning the British Pavilion since 1934. So for this year's Architecture Biennale, we chose Muff Architecture Art as the artistic director, and they introduced the theme of two-way traffic.
Già negli anni 70 ho cominciato ad andare in giro per Venezia per fotografarla perché mi piaceva a quell'epoca, anche prima mi piaceva. E conoscendo un mio amico che lavorava al Gazzettino, faceva il fotografo, mi ha insegnato a fare foto. E la passione è stata grande e così l'ho immortalata nelle fotografie per ricordarmela com'era all'epoca.
Pensare che noi potremmo andare avanti come una voce. Per poter fare questo, cosa dovremmo pensare? Bene, dovremmo fare un sacco di cose, dovremmo disinquinare la laguna.
Sono Amerigo Nutolo, ho collaborato con il Padiglione, col British Council del MAF Architecture Art, nel momento in cui è venuto fuori il desiderio di coinvolgere la popolazione locale. Per motivi di carattere burocratico, di tempi, di forze disponibili, questo probabilmente non è stato possibile prima del 21, è stato scelto il 21 di novembre, che è il giorno della Madonna della Salute.
Grazie, Jane. Are there any immediate questions? We can discuss everything later, but is there something right now? No. Thank you very much again. So we would like to proceed, and hopefully we will manage technically with the next keynote by Victoria Siddall. She's going to join us from London, and her presentation is going to be about creative sustainability, rethinking, reusing and rebuilding the pavilions in Venice. Victoria Siddall is a trustee and co-founder of Gallery Climate Coalition, as well as a non-executive director of Freeze. She was previously Global Director of Frieze, overseeing the fairs in London, New York, Los Angeles, and Seoul. For the past 10 years, she has been a trustee of Studio Voltaire and currently chairs the board of Studio Voltaire, a non-profit gallery and artist studio complex in London that has recently reopened after major capital redevelopment. She is also a trustee of the Ampersand Foundation and a member of the reopening committee of the National Portrait Gallery and of the advisory committee of the Palazzo Strozzi in Florence. So please welcome Victoria. Seems to work. Hello, Victoria.
Hi, good morning.
We need
Can you
some
hear me?
sound. Yes, we can hear you. Thanks for joining
Wonderful.
us. Great you're here with us.
Thank you for having me. I wish I was in Venice. But it's great to be joining you on digitally, wonders of technology. Thank you very much, Sandy, and for Helvetia for asking me to join the conference today. I firstly wanted to commend this initiative towards the Green Line, which is really inspiring to see that all of the pavilions in Venice are thinking about this, taking this issue so seriously, and coming together to collaborate to find solutions. It's important, obviously, not only for the opportunity for the Venice pavilions to be more sustainable, but also for the positive influence that this can have. The Venice Biennale, I don't need to tell you, is the most important event in the art and architecture calendars and is attended by people with great power and influence. Art and the art world really have the opportunity to lead the way in these changes. And the changes that we make and talk about will have ripple effects throughout the world. I also want to acknowledge that the Biennale model and the pavilions don't fit exactly into the regular boxes of the art world, such as galleries and museums. And for that reason, I'm sure you have specific needs and questions. I'm going to speak initially for 20, 30 minutes, mainly about Gallery Climate Coalition and the work that we've done so far. But I will also leave the same amount of time at the end for questions. So I hope we can begin to address some of the specificities around your work today. The other reason I wanted to compliment you all for being here for this event is that collaboration really is the only way we can solve this problem. It's not something that will be done in isolation. And this was the realization we had 3 years ago when we began to form Gallery Climate Coalition. It was a group of individuals and small businesses that make up the art world. We realized that we could have real power to make change as a coalition, both in terms of research, information sharing, as well as lobbying for change across our businesses. So to start with some background on this subject, there are two key issues to consider when we discuss art and sustainability. One, of course, is the power of art and artists to influence and inspire and bring about change through their work. There was a piece in the New York Times a couple of months ago which referenced art and artists during the AIDS crisis in New York in the 80s and how powerful they were in raising awareness and ultimately affecting political change. We are all working across platforms that have that potential to influence and inspire and really make change in the world. So this is, of course, very relevant to the Biennale, although it's not what I'm going to focus on in this presentation. Because the second aspect, of course, is the kind of practical aspects of how, as a community and an industry, we cut our carbon emissions and we all work together towards the shared goals set by the UN. The work of GCC falls into this second category. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. I have some slides to show you. And excuse me while I just work out this technology, a new system for me. Okay, so Gallery Climate Coalition. Just pick that up seamlessly. GCC is an international charity and membership organization that provides environmental sustainability goals and guidelines for the art sector. It was founded by a group of galleries, writers, and others in the art world who recognized that everybody we spoke with in our industry cared about this and wanted to make changes, from galleries to curators to artists, but found that as individuals and small businesses, we didn't have the guidance and tools and kind of organizational power that we needed to do so. We realized that we could have more strength and impact in numbers, both in terms of galvanizing and supporting the industry, but also in terms of lobbying power and making changes across the board. So the goals are simple, and you can see those on the screen now. All of our members sign up to these goals, essentially. And the first and main one is a minimum of 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. And that, of course, is the goal set by the Paris Agreement. And the second is zero waste by 2030, where facilities allow. And that's defined as zero waste to landfill. Obviously, there will always be waste, but the idea is zero waste to landfill. So that's where we're aiming to get to by 2030 as an industry. And I think it's important to say that, you know, there are huge businesses within that industry who operate internationally and have vast carbon emissions. And then there are very small businesses whose carbon emissions are extremely low. So obviously we're trying to sort of target the work where it can have most impact. But all members have signed up to this. Otherwise, I should say it's free to join. Resources are free to use because we didn't want there to be any barrier to entry. Can we get to the next slide, please? So this just details the kind of three pillars of the work we do. So the first is sector-specific sustainability guidance, required to help the art industry lower its carbon emissions and meet those goals. The second is lobbying for greater systemic change, and this involves lobbying the shipping industry, the insurance industry, you know, potentially government further down the line, but kind of using that coalition power to actually make changes that will make it easier for us to meet those goals, or even possible in some cases. I can't see the presentation anymore. Hopefully you can. Oh, there it is. And then the third is raising funds from within the art market, initiatives working on the front line of the climate crisis. So this is another area in which we as the art world have power, essentially, is to look outside of our industry at who is having the biggest effects in terms of fighting climate change and supporting them. Because what we realize the art world is also very good at is raising money and raising awareness. So I'm not going to go into great detail on this today, but one charity we've worked with is Client Earth, who is this incredible environmental, and we've raised around $8 million for them so far in the past year through artists donating works to be sold at auction. And the work they are able to do with that is, in terms of lowering carbon emissions, is far and away more than we as an industry can make ourselves. As a small example, they used some funds, I think it cost them around £300,000 in legal fees to close down a series of coal-fired power stations in Poland. And the annual carbon emissions from those power stations was equivalent to 3 times the emissions of Europe's biggest airline. So that's important work as well that I think I wanted to mention because it's important not to overlook. Again, the kind of power and influence we can have outside of our own work. And the next slide, please. This gives you an outline of the membership of GCC as it currently stands. We announced it and launched it just over 2 years ago, and we now have over 800 members. This slide is slightly out of date. There's actually almost 40 countries now that are represented in the GCC membership. But also, I think interesting to see how it breaks down across the art world. So over 300 commercial galleries, which is where we originally started, but now also 120 institutions and nonprofits. and over 100 artists and collectors, and then 160 plus art sector businesses. That includes Christie's and Sotheby's, Frieze and Basel, so all the kind of big art businesses, as well as some smaller ones too, some of the shippers as well, and then over 130 individuals. So it's fairly broad and goes across the whole sector. And that actually, I will say, it is really important in terms of chances of success, because it can't just be one part of the sector, just artists or just galleries or just museums trying to do this in isolation. It has to be kind of accepted across every link in the chain. So bringing everybody along on that journey is really, really important. And the next slide, please. There are also some active volunteer teams working in different cities around the world. So the first to launch was London, just because we're based here and set it up here, and then Berlin. Los Angeles responded very quickly as well. I think they are a city that sees the effects of climate change through things like fires in the city, and so they're very aware of this issue. Italy came next with a group that actually set up across Naples, Rome, and Milan. Or it'd be great to involve Venice in that as well. And then Taipei launched recently as well, fairly independently. They got in touch and said, we want to form our own GCC. We said, fantastic. And then Zurich and Basel hasn't officially launched yet, but that's the latest one that's in the works. And thank you to Sandy, who I think has been involved in that as well. So it's a very international venture, basically. And again, that it's a very international art world, as you know, and industry. So really important that it kind of touches kind of all aspects of what we all work on. So the next thing I wanted to mention is measuring and the carbon calculator. So this is something we realized was a kind of key resource from the start, because if you can't measure and if you don't know where your emissions are coming from, it's very difficult to know where you need to reduce. And I think that's kind of where the art world has been with this issue in the past, before doing carbon audits, is sort of wanting to make positive changes. Oh, sorry, let's go back. I'm going to actually, if you could stop screen sharing for a second, I'm going to try and show the calculator because it's online. I think I should be able to. Is that possible to close the presentation? And I'll bring it back up again. I'm just going to try to show you something here. Maybe it doesn't want me to do this either. Can you see that? I think you probably only now see this and not me, but yeah, that's not going to work.
We see it, yes, Victoria, it's perfect. Creating an environmentally responsible art world.
Yeah, but I don't think I can actually, I wanted to give you a demonstration of how to use the calculator, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. So apologies. I will just explain it, but please do have a look at it when you get the chance. So the carbon calculator was built as a kind of key resource from the start for GCC members. And it's free to use again, and it's quite fun to play with. I can't show you right now, but if you take a look at it online, it basically, and I think this will be quite relevant to a lot of the work done by the Venice Pavilions, because it just allows you over the course of a year to log in, and every time you take a flight or a train or ship something, you can add it into the calculator and it adds it onto your account essentially. So at the end of a project or the end of a year, you can generate a carbon audit. It's not 100% accurate. It's not like bringing a company in who are going to go through every single receipt and do that for you, but it gives you a pretty good picture. It's also quite a useful comparison tool, because you can put in, for example, a flight from, Berlin to Venice, and you can see in economy class return, and you can see what the emissions are of that flight, and you can compare it to the same journey by train. So it's quite useful in that regard, in a sort of like comparison tool. Also, the big difference between air freight and sea freight and land freight, you can use the tool to kind of measure those differences, as well as recording your own emissions. So yeah, we've had a lot of uptake on that, and it's been used not only by galleries and institutions to produce their annual carbon audits, but some of them have used it on exhibition. So for example, Tate used the GCC carbon calculator to measure the emissions of their Anarchy Yi turbine hall installation. So that made me think particularly of the Venice pavilions and how the calculator can actually be used to measure emissions on a project basis. That might be incredibly useful as a point of measurement for everybody in this room. Could I have the presentation back again now, please? Apologies, that slightly failed attempt. So I wanted to show you some of these because it's just interesting to see how they break down. This is, of course, Hauser and Wirth audit. I don't know how legible the text is. The blue is shipping. As you can see, 60% of their annual carbon emissions come from shipping. And of course, the majority of that, it will most likely be air freight, which is the widest used form of shipping across the art world. The red is travel. So that makes up another sort of around 30%. And then the rest is energy. So sort of building energy mainly. But as you can see, like nearly 90% of a gallery's emissions for a global gallery are coming from shipping and travel. And the next one. This is Modern Art, a gallery in London. And I wanted to show this again because they have one space, slightly different setup. But you can see again, it's over 90% of emissions are coming from shipping and travel. So for commercial galleries, that's a real eye-opener. It really helps to focus the mind on where the reductions need to be made. And I think before this kind of tool was available to galleries, they were kind of guessing at where emissions were coming from and how they might reduce. And this has made it much, much clearer. The next slide. This is from Nottingham Contemporary, which is an institution. It's a museum in the UK, kind of mid-sized institution in the UK. And I wanted to show this because, again, it shows how very different this picture can be. So for this mid-sized institution, 90% of their emissions are coming from their building. So that's their building energy, essentially, predominantly heating and cooling the building, as well as lighting, but very, very different picture to the commercial galleries. And again, shows, like how different the areas of focus need to be in order to make those 50% reductions across different types of organizations. So I also want to say, really applaud the galleries and institutions who've not only done this work, but have also shared the information with us, because it really helps GCC know where to focus our work. So we're now working on dedicated resources for artists and museums based on this different knowledge. We have a lot of resources for galleries already. Many of them apply across the board. And actually on the next slide, you can see the resources that, so these are the volunteer committees that have produced resources that are free to access on the GCC website. So we have extensive resources around shipping and insurance, conservation, travel, waste and recycling, printing and publishing, resources for registrars, circularity, packaging and materials, and we're adding more to those all the time. But I hope that some of those will be useful for you in your work as well, in trying to find more some environmentally responsible solutions. So again, please do take a look at those. I would also say, if there's things that you're not finding on the website that you need, it's very helpful to let GCC know that, because we're constantly kind of adding to those resources and trying to fill in the gaps to help bring everybody along on this journey. So the next slide is an example of the difference in emissions for different types of shipping. So currently, air freight makes up around kind of 80–90% of the total amount of art shipped by a typical commercial art gallery. And for every ton of artwork, air freight produces around 10 times more CO2 than freight carried the same distance by road, and 60 times more than freight carried the same distance by sea. So sea freight can be a huge win in terms of bringing down carbon emissions. I know it doesn't come without complications, and those are some of the things that we're working with those businesses on. But from the footprints calculated to date, air freight alone makes up around half of all the emissions from all GCC members' operations. So huge gains to be made here. This slide shows the example of a difference in air and sea freight. Again, very small text, I apologize, but I can read it to you. It's the example based on one created painting of around 250 by 50 centimeters. Numbers accurate as of August 2020. So this shows a flight from, sorry, I can't read it myself here, London to Hong Kong. And the yellow circle shows the carbon emissions from air freighting the painting. And the green circle shows the same carbon emissions from sea freighting the painting. Obviously, there's a time difference. Instead of taking 10 hours, it takes more like 2 weeks or more. The other interesting thing is that it costs less. So these sea freight is actually less expensive. So this is something that, you know, with some organization and additional time built in, and, you know, and somewhat changing practices of shippers and insurers, I grant you, then huge achievements can be made. So that's just an interesting illustration of how big a difference we can make with that one small change. Travel. So if we skip to the next slide, we've got another interesting example based on travel. So what this shows is the difference in flying or taking the train between Berlin and Basel. So on the left, you have the carbon emissions of a flight from Berlin to Basel. And on the right, the purple circle, you have the equivalent emissions by train. And interestingly, the train is, again, less expensive than the flight, but it does take a little longer. So both of these options are a little slower, but quite radical in terms of the difference that can be made by switching them. The next slide, actually, I wanted to mention one more thing on travel before we move on, which is, actually, you can keep it on this, it's fine, but just in terms of measuring emissions, and I imagine this will apply to the different pavilions. If you're measuring your own emissions, it'll be your travel, your artist travel, how you're shipping the work there, packaging materials you're using, and so on, the energy that you're using in the building, which is all scope 1. And I learned this from years of art fairs and kind of measuring our emissions. And of course, what we were measuring was what we were spending money on. It was our emissions. But of course, where things become interesting for something like art fairs or biennales is scopes 2 and 3. So it's not just what we spend money on, but it's how everybody who travels to an art fair or to a biennale, how do they travel there? You know, what kind of means of transport do they use? So it's kind of all of those sort of, you know, associated emissions, essentially, that are not within our control, but that we can potentially influence. And I know that, you know, global fairs are now looking to survey everybody who attends their fairs to find out how they traveled to the city, which may well be a conversation the Biennale is having already, but could easily do the same thing. And it not only provides really interesting data, but it also kind of shows an awareness of this issue and you know, a move towards addressing it, essentially. If you're interested in travel in particular, Tino Segal did an amazing talk for GCC that's online about the fact that he hasn't taken a plane for years, and it's about his adventures traveling all over the world by boats and trains, which is quite entertaining. So the next slide, sorry, was on travel. Again, I'll just talk you through that briefly. Excuse me. This is actually illustrating the different classes of travel. So the blue circles are economy flights and the gold circles are first class flights between basically from London to New York, Miami, LA, Dubai, Shanghai, Hong Kong. But again, I think there's a sort of, you know, maybe there's sort of a disconnect between the sort of, understanding that the flight has carbon emissions, but actually the class in which you travel also radically increases the carbon emissions. So if you're measuring your annual footprint and you're traveling first class, lucky you, but it does have significantly bigger carbon footprint. So the next slide is actually, this is a work by Cecily Brown that was donated to Client Earth, the charity I met earlier. And I'm showing this really just to illustrate the fact that there is a momentum around this issue that didn't exist 5 years ago. There is an incredible movement by artists to support charities working in this area. Cecily Brown gave this painting, Rashid Johnson gave a work, so did Anthony Gormley, Beatrice Miliazes, to this auction series supporting an environmental charity that they had no connection with in the past, but that they could just see the importance of the work that they were doing. So I really believe this is going to be the biggest conversation of our time over the coming years. I think that artists and staff members in museums, galleries everywhere will be pressuring for change. And there's an opportunity now to start making these changes, to get out in front of this and not wait until, as an industry, we're kind of scrabbling to make changes, rather than doing it now because we know it's the right thing. So there are reasons to be hopeful. We held a conference, a GCC conference this time last year in London, and the British Nigerian poet Ben Okri said a few words at the end of it, which really resonated with me and that I've kind of thought about quite a bit since. And it comes back to the point I made at the beginning about the influence of art and the art world on others. He said, "You are the art world and you consider yourself a small part of a bigger problem, but you're an extremely important part of it because you deal with vision and how people see and how they clarify their perception of the world. Art is potentially extremely powerful in the possibilities of climate change and should be one of the leaders." So I'm going to end on that note. Thank you very much. We have plenty of time for questions.
Thank you, Victoria, very much. Yes,
Pleasure.
we have a microphone for questions. So
Great.
thank you so much, and sorry for the technical troubles. We worked out at the end very well.
Good.
Okay, so please don't hesitate. Questions. Maybe I spontaneously start with one. There's Sini, just a second. Sini, okay.
Hello, Sini from Finland. I don't know if you can see me, but you can hear.
I can just.
What's your target on widening up the network around the world?
That's a really good question. The volunteer groups in different cities are really effective, actually, and it's something that we've been conscious of the beginning. Is this is something we have to kind of give away and hand over responsibility to groups in different cities, partly because they will then do the work and take ownership of it and lead in those different areas, but also because each city is quite specific and has different needs and concerns. We're talking to people in Sao Paulo about setting up a group there. And of course, environmental concerns and needs and practical application are really different in Sao Paulo to in London. So it's important that it's kind of, these things are locally led. So in an ideal world, we would have a GCC volunteer group working in every kind of major art city around the world. So that's what we're kind of working towards. In terms of the membership, it's not only about sort of geographical spread, we want people signed up from everywhere in the world. It's also about the different types of people. And, having artists engaged in this is incredibly important because I think on the whole, the people that museums and galleries are most likely to listen to are artists. And then at the other end of the chain, collectors. So that's something we haven't really started our work on signing up collectors yet, but that will be really, really vital. Because I think often in a commercial gallery context, for example, if they sell an artwork, to somebody on the other side of the world. They may want to send it by sea freight, but if the collector wants it tomorrow, then it has to go on a plane. So it's sort of having everybody along that chain joined up in their thinking, and doing and just accepting that this is a sort of better way to work. So yeah, we very much welcome groups forming in different parts of the world. So if you're interested, then please let me know. And actually, funnily enough, the Zurich and Basel group, which was the latest to form, came out of a talk that I gave online for a group of people in Zurich on this topic. And a few people in the room decided that's something that would be fantastic for them to have locally, and went about setting it up. So it can be that easy.
We have also some visitors online on a Zoom call, and we have a question by Lisiane. I think that's from Superuse, isn't it? She asked a very, very technical questions to you. Which database is the one you're using for your system?
For which system? For the calculator?
Yes.
So it was built by ArtLogic. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope so. I'm sorry, my technical knowledge is not very in depth, but it was built. So it's built on an ArtLogic system, as is our website. Yeah, that's all I can tell you, I'm afraid. But please do have a look at it, and if you have questions about it, if you want to send those to me, I'm very happy to get answers to you once you sort of taken a look at it.
Thank you. More questions from the audience? Yes, there is one. Sevra.
Hi, Victoria. I hope you can hear me. I'm Sevra Davis. I'm the Commissioner of the British Pavilion. My question relates to the carbon calculator and how you said it informs what changes then you seek to make within those industries. And I guess the question is whether or not you're actually seeking to make change in those industries, for example, making sea freight easier, or making the sector more comfortable and making some of the complications more palatable, if that makes sense, or is it both? I hope the question makes sense.
It is both, and I think it's a really good question. I think you have to do one before you can do the other, and so I think that's why these sort of like simple graphics and information sharing about how these changes can take place are really vital. I think just going to a gallery or a museum or someone and saying you have to cut your carbon emissions by 50% is sort of it's not helpful as a sort of starting and ending point. But the sort of graphics we've produced, some of which I showed you, the sort of comparisons between air and sea freight and travel, the cost element is really interesting there too. And I think for institutions at the moment, knowing that 90% of their emissions come from building energy, and that we are facing an energy crisis in the next year or so, especially in the UK, and that costs of energy are going to be incredibly high. Like this, there is in many instances, there's a double incentive to do this work. I think for institutions to be able to lower their energy usage right now is not only going to bring their emissions down, but it's also going to save them money at a time that's going to be incredibly important. So yeah, in terms of the sort of the comfort factor, I think, presenting that whole picture and not, and being clear that it's not, it's not going to necessarily just cost them time and money, but that there are sort of various benefits to doing this is quite a helpful part of that narrative. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Jane from We Are Here Venice. I want to ask if you can answer this. Thank you for a really clear presentation. Can you share any stories about having to encounter any indifference or resistance to what you're doing within the industry?
Yeah, I think I don't want to point any fingers particularly, because I do think it's sort of, everybody pulling together on this that's going to make it work. And I also think if people feel that they're going to be criticized or shamed or something. It's not, you know, I do try and avoid that very much. I think one of the challenges is shipping, as you can see from the kind of the audits. And you know, so we initially, I guess this maybe illustrates the sort of complexity of this, is that, you know, so we initially went to the shippers and said, why are you not giving people the option to ship by sea every time? And they said, oh, but it's not our fault necessarily, it's the insurers. It's because the insurers won't actually insure the work to go on a boat. So then we had to kind of switch focus and move to the insurers and speak to them about it and say, you know, it's not the shipper's fault, why are you not insuring the work? And of course, it, you know, once you start looking into these issues, it does become quite complex. So it's not so much a kind of, no one's saying, you know, we're not interested in being more environmentally responsible, but there are obviously hurdles. And I would say, if anything, the resistance is kind of the status quo. It's like, this is how our industry works. And if you start pulling away blocks, then, you know, there's a worry that it kind of impacts the whole structure. But that's, I guess that's why I'm saying the kind of those positive conversations, like going to people and saying, this is how you can change. Like, these are small incremental things that you can do that are possibly going to save you money, as well as bringing down your carbon emissions, and also give you something positive to talk about with the outside world, which will help sort of bring everybody along on that journey. So it's complicated, but I think, as I said, the resistance is more resistance to change than resistance to environmental responsibility. I mean, I'd hope that at this point everyone's pretty well agreed that we've got to, you know, we have to make these changes. But I also acknowledge it's, you know, it's not necessarily straightforward and it will take some time. But one thing, for example, that we are asking the shippers to do, and I think it's one thing that everybody here can do if you are booking art shipments, is always to ask the shippers to give an alternative to air freight on a quote. So what we'd love to see eventually is that every time somebody requests a shipping quote, is that they get the option for air freight, if that's their normal practice, but they also have on that quote, they have an alternative to air freight with the comparative price and also the comparative carbon emissions. So a little bit like if you go to a supermarket and you're looking at two food products, and now you have the calorie count, salt content, sugar content, fat content. So you know, you might still choose the one that's, you know, got more of all those things, but you're making an informed decision. So it's just that sort of transparency of information and allowing people to make an informed decision. So that, again, I think is something everybody can be part of. It's just requesting that whenever you speak to a shipper.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ursula, and I'm from an organization called Fashion Revolution. I identify with a lot of what you're saying. We now have over 80 global groups all over the world. I'm interested in finding out whether GCC is exclusively environmental or whether you touch the social aspect. And I'm also interested in finding out whether amongst your resources there is one more specifically around materials that artists use, so the provenance of those materials, and whether you're looking at the supply chain behind and not just forward.
Yeah, both really good questions. So the first one, which was the sort of focus of GCC, we have made GCC very focused and targeted on these shared goals. But we help to bring together a group of, I think there are 11 sort of art and climate initiatives, charities working in different parts of the world. And we brought them together under an umbrella called PACT, which is Partners in Art and Climate Targets. And so within PACT, there are a lot of different organizations like Galleries Commit, Artists Commit, Key Culture, which works with museums specifically, a lot about climate control. So there are lots of different, and Art into Acres as well, which is run by Hayley Mellon, who's an artist who sort of, you know, buys tracts of land and protects them. So those are now all together under that one umbrella. So while GCC has quite specific goals, there are others working on all of these different aspects, including kind of climate justice and, you know, as you say, the more kind of social aspects of that. So yeah, but we've tried to keep GCC quite focused, just because it's quite a big goal already, and others are doing good work in those other areas. And your second question, sorry, just remind me again. We got distracted. What was the
Just
second part?
curiosity related, I was looking at your resources and I was wondering whether
Yeah.
you also
materials,
provide
yeah.
information around materials.
Yeah, very good point. So it's something that we're starting now because we are going to bring together a group of artists to form a kind of committee to talk to them specifically about their needs, which again are quite different to the needs of galleries, museums that we focused on very much so far. So the kind of very specific artist resources are coming next. We've done a lot about packaging materials. So there's quite a lot of information on the website about packaging materials, looked into all the kind of alternatives to bubble wrap and so on. But for artists in particular, that's the next piece of work that we've got coming up.
Hello, my name is Franziska Gödecke. I'm one of the curators of the German Pavilion. Thank you, first of all, for your inspiring speech. I have a question also more concerning the material realm of what you were saying, and you would define two goals, which one being very reluctant on like the CO2 emissions and like cutting them down by 50%, which is a very noble goal, and I think you made it very clear how you imagine to reach it. The second one was like the getting more zero waste, and as we are now trying to reuse a lot of materials from the artists or the art biennale, we notice it's actually really hard to do it because in a lot of times, if it's not like exhibitions, it's just like artworks hanging on the wall, so more installations and glued and tiles and whatever, it's actually very hard to put them from the walls or out of it and reuse them. So I think to actually change it there, this involves also taking some measures to speak with the artists before, and I imagine this is a bit harder because you have to actually get involved in like the artist procedure of producing art. So how are you managing this towards your goal of getting zero waste?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And as you said, and I think particularly relevant to something like the Biennale where, you know, in the pavilions, it isn't often paintings and drawings hanging on the wall. It is more kind of installation based and in Venice. So not in, you know, a city where these things might be more easily sourced and then reused and so on. But I think it is a matter of working with the artist on that and kind of ascertaining at the very beginning of the dialogue, at the very beginning of the commissioning process, that this is, you know, a factor and an area of concern. And it can sometimes be about like things like how the tiles are glued to the wall. Like, does it make them removable and reusable, or does it render them useless? And you know, it's not something, I have to say, like that aspect of it, and we're not super expert on yet at GCC. That's coming next. And I think all of these sort of questions are really helpful to feed into that work that we will be producing resources around. One thing that does exist, I know this might not be so helpful in Venice, but it's sort of starting and exists now in London, New York, and LA at least, is a platform called Barder, which is BARDER. And it's essentially like an online resource for the circularity of exhibition materials. So the idea is that after an exhibition, a gallery or an artist or a museum can post all of the different exhibition materials that would normally go in a skip, and people can just come and pick them up. So if you're a young artist and you're looking for, I don't know, a plinth, or you're a young gallery and you need crates, then, you know, the sort of the exhibition maker can put those up on it's like a kind of Gumtree or Craigslist or something for exhibition materials. And it could be crates, plinths, AV equipment, could be walls, could be installation materials, anything. But, you know, and this is something that's starting small, but it's, again, a step towards that circularity and kind of reusing materials rather than just automatically throwing them away.
there any more questions from the audience? Okay. Thank you very much, Victoria. It seems all clear at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry?
Oh, I was just saying thank you. And just one other thing briefly is that we are organizing a conference. GCC is organizing a conference for museums specifically, which will be in early March next year. So if that's of interest, again, very happy to keep you informed. It'll be in the UK and we're organizing it in collaboration with the Whitechapel Gallery. And then the aim is to do something similar in the US for US museums later next year. But that will be specific for museums and non-profits, so may have some relevance to this audience.
Just probably a last question also from my side. How do you see it if we, kind of the commissioners, which are backed by different institutions, state institutions, how would be the best way to interact or become part of your organization? Does that make sense somehow?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the list of members on the GCC website, you'll see that it's incredibly diverse in terms of the people who've signed up, and ranges from, as I said, kind of big businesses like Christie's and, you know, Hauser and Wirth and Gagosian and Frieze and Basel and so on. But then there are individual artist names on there. There are institutions, there are, you know, small galleries or big galleries. So I think even as, you know, even as sort of, you know, Pro Helvetia or whatever it is, you can just sign up and become a member. And in order to become a member, all we ask is that you sign up to the shared goals and that you give a point of contact. So a person who can be the kind of, you know, the person that GCC communicates with. And we have newsletters that we send out regularly full of information and updates, and they will go to that nominated person. So I would say to everybody here, if you have somebody in your organization who can sort of take charge of this issue, you know, we found often it's registrars in galleries who are particularly interested in this and can actually sort of make the changes, then they can be that point of contact. And just join up as a member. There's no barriers to entry other than the commitment to sort of join everybody on this journey to try to make these changes and meet the goals.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and I hope the rest of the conference is a great success. Yeah, enjoy the next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Have a nice day. So we continue now working in smaller workshop groups on different teams. Thank you and bye-bye. So we are approaching the coffee break, but before we get there, I think Francine van Westernen is going to give us some words already regarding how we will work in the workshops. Maybe we can try to, I don't know, sketch it, define it a bit, because then we'll split up in the groups. And it's very important to say that this workshop is not a kind of top-down organization, it's a bottom-up organization. So you're all asked to participate, to be active. It's not that we have predefined too much, we have asked some questions or other, but you're all as kind of on the same level to decide what's going to happen and also probably to discuss which results we want to reach tomorrow. Please, Francine.
Hello everybody, my name is indeed Francine van Westerenen. I'm the head of the agency department of het Nieuwe Instituut. I'm here together with Ellen Zoete, program manager also for Venice, and I'm then here as the commissioner of the Dutch Pavilion. I have to say that I'm really excited to be here and also to see you all. I think somebody this morning, I think it was Stefan, that we spoke about this little seed. No, it was with you, Ursula. The little seed that sometimes you have this idea, oh yeah, it was planted back then, and look what actually has grown out of it. And I was really pleased to see the Stadium of Close Looking on screen, because in 2010 my daughter was born, and I think she was only a month old when I traveled here. And I made a drawing for her in that stadium from, I think, some leaves that were actually there. And and maybe it is a bit obvious to mention your daughter as a point of awareness at one point that you think, yeah, but this means that this world actually should live on, or should be for her as well as it was for me and for my parents back then. But it did, actually. It was that moment when I started also some exhibitions in the institute that I worked back then, all focusing on actually the value of how we are living together, just to make it very short. So I was really touched by it. Also, it was the long version. I was thought, yeah. So I really believe in this seed, but I also believe in seeing and making things visible. And by artists who are making actually things visible for you. Because I think once you have seen it, you cannot unsee things. That's the point where awareness starts. And I think we actually reached that point of awareness, at least with this group, because the awareness actually made you all come here and talk with each other, and actually to become, to go beyond this awareness and making maybe little steps towards a change. Not big solutions, because I don't think we will actually solve all the issues that we are facing. But at least we can work together and we can collaborate. And I think that is actually the most important element of being here and also being in the group of commissioners, that we can actually collaborate, and together we can make a stronger plea for this change. So presenting the invisible, showing what is invisible, actually what lies behind all the beautiful presentations that you see in the pavilion. I think that is one of the most essential things to do. And this morning I discussed also with Ellen, for whom are we doing that? For whom are we making this visible? I can imagine that we do that partly for the visitors, but it's also partly for us, actually to see the impact of the things that you do, to see the consequences of the changes that you make differently. I think that is really, I think some of the things that are important. And I really hope that is also some of the things that will be discussed throughout these 2 days, how to show the consequences and also make these consequences really active and possible in the way that we are working. Because of course, the consequences of doing things differently are there. And I also had to think, I've also traveled by plane, because the train took me 2 days extra, and I could not leave home for 2 days extra, which is a consequence that you take. But as long as you can take those choices deliberately and conscious, that helps. Okay, so we are in this laboratory for 2 days. It's not to rate, it's not to compare each other, it's not to pull fingers and say, hey, this is something that you do really bad. I think we're all here to learn from each other and also to see where we can come. It's an honest dialogue in that sense. We are working towards some conclusions, you could say, kind of summaries by the end of this day and also tomorrow. Also to give us a feeling that we have actually achieved something. So it's not only being together, which is already nice, but also maybe make some steps and also make some, could be small steps, maybe also some force for, what do you call it, or maybe bigger visions for future changes. Today we have 3 workshops. The first is dealing with materials. That will be hosted by the Swiss Pavilion. And now I'm looking at Sandy. Where is that workshop? It's for the viewers, right, left, what's... Okay, so, and you're all listed on that.
Everybody should be listed.
Indeed.
Little changes, please correct it here yourself or let us know, so we know exactly who is in the room. This is the biggest room we have, and it's 24 people applied for this.
Perfect, perfect. So that's the first one, dealing with materials. The second one, flows of resources, people, travel stools, that will be hosted by the Netherlands, me and Ellen, together with Superu Studios. That will be in room.
This is on this side in the library.
In the library, perfect. And the third one today is the local biennial, best practices, active initiatives hosted by Germany and Austria, and I assume that will be then
It's also on this
also
side.
this side,
Also
okay.
on this side. There's 2 rooms on this side.
And the other one.
One after the other.
Super. Then I leave you with this, some thoughts, have a coffee and enjoy the day, and I'm really looking forward.
Let's have a proper coffee break to relax a bit, to get some fresh air. You can go on the balcony, not all together as we said, and then we start afterwards. Thank you.